Are you asking for a massive rethink?
Yes, absolutely. We have climate chaos on the way. Even if we stop emitting carbon tomorrow, right? Even if we were to nationalize all the big oil companies, which I think is a good idea and should be discussed.
And I can hear people on Wall Street at the moment screaming as you mentioned that.
Yeah, and we need to take the possibility of, an economic collapse that might come if we did that seriously. But, the science says that that's what we need to do, right? The IPCC Doomsday Report from last October said very clearly we have 12 years if we want to stay anywhere near 1.5 degrees. So we need to wind down fossil capitalism very, very quickly. But even if we did that successfully, and even if we came up with all sorts of fancy carbon dioxide removal strategies and technologies, we've put most of the heat that we've generated through carbon emissions into the oceans. And the oceans, kind of like the Titanic, they're not going to shift direction anytime soon. We're going to melt a hell of a lot of ice. A lot of glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland are going into the oceans. And so we're going to have a lot of sea level rise. And it's not going to stop in 2100. So most of the cities and coastal areas around the world are going to be flooded. Some to the point where they're going to have to be abandoned. Some where, major forms of adaptation are going to be necessary. But, it'll be survivable. So we need to start theorizing that and planning for it now, rather than waiting for the gigantic storms to come and decimate places.
What does that rethink look like then? Because anti-fragile has been a sort of mantra that's going around, especially after the financial crash. And what's happened is, ironically, we think we've lived in this free market. We've got incredibly centralised economies, and there's this huge rut of capital that's all come together, as with cities. Are you saying that a more distributed cityscape, a more distributed landscape, populationscape, if you like, is a more resilient way to go? Is that too simplistic?
Yeah, no, I don't think that makes sense. Simply because if we need to rebuild cities, either in part or in whole, we need to do so in a way that means that we're emitting as little carbon as possible.
Right,
and,
so you want to take out the urban sprawl and you want to take out commuting.
Exactly, right. We need public transportation. We can't just substitute electric vehicles for gas-powered cars, because to create an e-vehicle, you have to manufacture it. That's a hell of a lot of steel and rubber and other
things. So the rethink is way more, let's say, it's using what we have at the moment, but then replacing it with smarter thinking about how we interact with those spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about smarter thinking. And before I was being critical of starchitects, I don't want to discount the profession as a whole. There's a lot of interesting thought being done about how to live in a more sustainable relationship to natural systems, including floodplains and similar kinds of things. So there's a lot of imaginative stuff being done there. But what I find missing from a lot of that conversation is an emphasis on social justice. If we're thinking about a city that's likely to be flooded, who gets to move and when do they get to move? How are those decisions made? And how can we ensure that the rich people aren't pulling up stakes and buying other properties and turning coastal communities into essentially environmental ghettos where people are facing all kinds of disasters?